we are hosting session six of the Academia 2063 Ukraine Crisis webinar series. And the topic for today's conversation is vegetable oils market disruptions, income and food security effects. As always, we are providing simultaneous interpretation in English and French, and we are live streaming on our YouTube channel. We will be right back to kick off the session. Thank you so much for your patience. Hello, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us. Welcome to everyone. We can see your comments in the chats. Thank you once again for joining us for session 6 of the Academia 2063 Ukraine Crisis webinar series. For those who are just joining, my name is Laibu Taki, and I'm the Director of Communication and Outreach for Academia 2063. We are excited to welcome you to yet another session of our Ukraine Crisis webinar series. I hope that by now you all have been able to visit the portal to see the research that we are conducting on the economic impacts of the Ukraine crisis on Africa's economies. Our topic for today is vegetable oils market disruptions, income and food security effects. We are providing simultaneous interpretation in English and French, and we are live streaming on our YouTube channel. As always, please head to the Q&A to drop any questions you might have in the course of the conversation. And if you wish to intervene live, please raise your hand and the moderator will give you the floor. Now, please welcome the moderator of today's session. He is policy advisor at the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. Please welcome Mr. Nathan Klein.
Thanks very much, Lai, and welcome everybody to the sixth webinar in the Ukraine Crisis and African Economies series. I just wanted to point out that it was 11 months ago today that Russia's military crossed the border into Ukraine, setting off an unprovoked invasion that launched a conflict between two global agricultural powerhouses. And we can now see how this conflict has taken its toll the world over. The rising fuel and food prices, inflation, and supply chain disruptions. Through a series of evidence briefs, 18 now in total, Academia 2063 has helped to shine light on how disruptions from this invasion are affecting rural and urban populations across Africa. Today's webinar will feature Dr. Lesa May Fall, Senior Associate Scientist at Academia 2063, sitting in for Dr. Ismail Fofana, who was the researcher, lead researcher for this work on the Ukraine crisis and disruptions in edible oils markets in Africa. Thank you all for your patience, and I think without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Fall to kick off her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ethan, for the introduction. So I will briefly present the main findings that we have on the analysis we did on vegetable oil market disruption, looking at the income and food security effects. Let me share quickly my screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, so during this presentation, we will discuss these main points. First, starting at looking at the global trends in the vegetable oils and the different price shocks that we were trying to estimate in this work. And then in a second step, we will talk about the country exposure to global vegetable oil market, so looking at how African countries are really exposed to these shocks. And then I will present the analytical framework, the main simulation scenarios, including the baseline and the Ukraine scenarios. And finally, we will talk about the household income effects, the food inflation effects, and the food consumption effect. So regarding the vegetable oils market disruption and price shocks, what we can see here is global oilseed prices were really projected to rise in 2022 after the start of the Ukraine crisis. And we have here the trend for coconut oil, for palm oil, and also the one for soybean oil. So in 2022, we see that for all three products, prices has increased and they are starting to decrease in 2023 and in 2024, but still it's higher than the value observed after the crisis. Now, when we analyze the exposure of African countries and their direct dependency on Ukraine and Russia imports, what we see in the first graph is for most of countries, we have a lower dependency, and countries that are mostly dependent are Sudan, Gabon, Libya, but we have also Algeria and Tunisia, with a higher export rate. In a second step, we try also to look at the import penetration ratio, which measure basically how far those countries are depending on imports to satisfy their domestic needs. And countries which have a value over 100% are countries that are most likely the most affected. And here we see that Rwanda, Lesotho, Mauritania, Namibia, Benin, and also Eswatini and Gabon, and I think Botswana are the only countries that have an import penetration rate over 100%, which means that those countries are the countries that are more likely re-exporting what they are re-exporting vegetable oils that they are importing. Now, in this map, we try to look at trade flows between African countries. And then we see that those countries that are highly exposed are re-exporting in countries like, for example, for Togo, we can see that value moving from Togo to Senegal, Niger, and Benin. And some other countries also are indirectly exposed. For example, Angola, South Africa, and DRC are exported through the exposure of Namibia. For the simulation part, the analytical framework is a stepwise approach. We first use single country CGA models with an input like the World Bank indicators to try to reproduce the macroeconomic structure of the country. And also we use the import and export data structure of the countries. So these results are used as an input in a micro simulation model to simulate the micro effects. To build our scenarios, we mainly rely on the projections done by the World Bank. So their projection focuses on 46 primary commodities, including vegetable oils related products. And there was simulations and projections done before the war started and simulation done after the start of the war. So we consider those two projections to basically simulate the impact on the African countries selected in this analysis. So as I said, in the baseline scenario, we assume that there are no major changes in the economies in the period 2022 and 2024. In the second scenario that we call Ukraine scenario, we assume that there are disruptions on vegetable oils markets, and these disruptions are the results of the Ukraine crisis. Now, after the simulation that we conducted on 4 main countries, namely Ghana, Malawi, Mozambique, and Uganda, we see that, for example, the percentage change in income for rural household, we have an increase up to 0.8% in 2022. And we have an increase for Ghana, but for other countries like Malawi, Mozambique, and Uganda, the effect is quite small on urban household, but also on rural household. The effect is more pronounced for Ghana, which is up to 3%, and then we have Mozambique and Uganda with a lower value, 1.5%, and Malawi is the one with the lowest value, which is less than 1%. Now, when we look at the income effect on the different household, the main findings is, for example, when we look at the change in gross income for rural farmers, we see a positive trend for the different countries and for the different groups of household. And for example, what we can see here is for the richest group in a rural area, the increase is higher. For the non-farmers groups, also the value that are higher are related to the household with the least revenue. In terms of food prices effect, we have a high food inflation pressure for all countries and all households, and this effect is higher for Mozambique, and then we have also a lower effect in Ghana, Malawi, and Uganda. For Mozambique, the effect for rural household is higher than the effect of urban household. This is the same thing for Ghana, and but the only difference in Malawi is in Malawi and Uganda we have the other effects where urban prices in urban areas are higher than prices observed in rural area. Now here we try to define. We try to present the food inflation effect by household group, and for Ghana, what we can see here is farmers and non-farmers and urban farmers are equally affected, and also the poorer households are also equally affected than the top richest household. For Malawi, what we see here is urban households are most affected than non-farmer household and farmers household. And in terms of income distributions, the top quintiles are more affected than the bottom quintiles. For the case of Mozambique, here we have farmers, agricultural farmers that are more affected than urban, and then non-farmers are the less affected. And same as Malawi, in Mozambique, top richest households are more likely to be affected by the crisis. In terms of food consumption effects, we have a positive food consumption outcome in Ghana, in rural Ghana, but for all other group of households, we have a negative food consumption outcomes, and this effect is more pronounced in Mozambique than Malawi and Uganda. Now, if we try to look at this effect according to the different group of household, rural household are more affected in Mozambique, but in Malawi we have urbans that are more affected. This is also a summary of what we discussed just now on food consumption effect, where for Ghana we have a positive effects, and for the two other countries we have a negative effects, with different effects according to the area and also according to the level of income. In terms of conclusion, with the projection made, so we saw that the Ukraine crisis has driven most of the vegetable prices up for the year 2022, and we mainly find some negative food security outcomes for Mozambique, for Malawi, and Uganda. But for Ghana, we can see some positive effect driven by the existence maybe of local vegetables, oils, and some oilseed industry that can try to minimize the effect of this dependency. And also this may be explained by the contribution of local vegetables, oils, and the oilseed industries to the agricultural sector, which may be very small and which can limit basically the impact on the economy. Now, in terms of perspective, the brief that we presented here was based on estimation made on April 2022, but we have recently some recent trend on vegetable oil prices. And now what we see here is prices are still increasing, but the increase is lower with the recent trend. So basically, the high prices observed at the very beginning of the crisis has started to lower a little bit, and this may be another feature to consider when assessing the impact of the vegetable oil market disruption on the economy. So I'm going to stop here, dear moderator, and looking forward to your questions, contributions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Saul. It was an excellent presentation, so I think that given the time, we may proceed to the questions and answer session. So I'll first turn to the audience and say, if you have any questions, please feel free to either raise hands or type them into the chat box adjacent. So actually, the first question posed by Martin Fowler, I think it's actually an excellent question, because it also tees up a question that I had for you, Dr. Saul, about this research. So as we saw, I mean, this has been a volatile year for vegetable oil prices for lots of different reasons. The war was one of the reasons, but coinciding with the war, right, Indonesia enacted an export restriction, an export tax that dramatically increased the price of their palm oil exports. And as the world's largest producer and exporter of palm oil, that also had some impacts. And then 2 months later, they had an outright export ban for about 3.5 weeks before retracting it, but the damage was done for global supply chains. I'm wondering, Dr. Saul, if you might perhaps reflect on this idea that, while the war has been impactful in vegetable oils, it's not in isolation, and there are other factors. There's the high price of fuel and its impact on channeling some into biodiesel production. So I guess maybe I'm wondering if you might just briefly reflect on the increases in sort of the bundle of vegetable oils, coconut versus palm, and if you could, and also the sunflower oil, and if you could perhaps maybe reflect on how that, how the higher proportional increases in palm and coconut oils versus sunflower seed oil might affect your model, and what your thoughts are on some of these other developments.
All right. Thank you for the question. So if I understand well, you want to know how our model can isolate the direct impact of the vegetable oils, right? All right.
Yes,
so,
and how the proportions of the increases affect the analysis.
Okay. So I mean, in the analytical framework, for sure we have different increases for vegetables oils, but also for other products like cereals and also fertilizers. Now, we had a first analysis where we tried to analyze the global effect, simulating the price changes observed for the 36 primary commodities. But for this specific analysis, we tried to isolate the one for vegetable oils. And then the simulations, the price changes applied just for the vegetable oil sector. Now, the only simulation made here is the price changes observed for the vegetable oil sectors and for these countries. I see Dr. Usman hand. Maybe he want to comment on this point also.
Yes, if that's okay, Nate, just a quick comment on that great question. What we have not built in the model is what has taken place leading to the war and may have contributed to the increase in global prices. And I said not built explicitly in the model, but the way we capture price changes may actually also cater for that. We did not, let me put it this way. For us, the changes that we assign to the crisis are the difference between global world prices as projected by the World Bank in October 2021 that should have captured any pre-war dynamics, including whatever happens in Indonesia and somewhere else. So I think it's embedded in their projections. Then we looked at their projections in April 2022. It is a difference. So although we didn't explicitly model for that, I would expect that they have been caught by the projections of the World Bank. So therefore, our assessment of changes in world prices should be okay and should probably be reflective of those different things. At the country level, and what Lisa was explaining, the ultimate impact depends on the share and the composition of vegetable oils imports of a given country. The model is built in a tree form where from the upper aggregated commodity of vegetable oils is disaggregated by different types of vegetable oils with the weight in imports and demand and consumption, and also the respective prices. So a substitution relationship therefore are captured there. And what happens in one country depends on that country's share and the weight of individual vegetable oils in the trade. So that's why you can have different implications in different countries, as well as what the vegetable oils industry looks like. Is it reliant on these intermediate inputs, or is it just final products that are imported? So thank you. Just wanted to share that broad comment.
Great, thank you, Dr. Badian. There's another question from the audience from Fatima Kareem that says, Ghana would be more affected than the rest in terms of the impact of the household effect, given the population will make it, as the population has a higher propensity to consume. Also, the positive consumption effect for Ghana might also be explained by the fact that Ghana has substitutes for imported vegetable oils, for example, palm oil. Dr. Saul, the question here for you is, do you have any explanation for the positive consumption effect for Ghana?
The global effects of the changes in prices depends really on the structure of the economy. For example, if the country is likely to have more revenue with price changes associated to these vegetables oils or to some substitute, what we can observe is a positive effect. And as I said, it's with the assumption that only the vegetable oils will be changing with the trend observed in the Ukraine scenarios. So basically, what I can say here is if we are finding a positive effect in Ghana, it's really related to the structure of the economy that we have observed in the social accounting matrix that was available for the simulation in the CGM modeling, and then also the effect on the different groups will depend on their dependency on vegetable oils consumption and their consumption habit as well. Over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Here's another question, also from Martin Fowler. Has anyone done any analysis of the overall reduction in quantities of vegetable oils consumed? Has the increase in prices led to a significant reduction in volumes purchased or traded internationally? or is the demand highly inelastic in all 4 countries, no matter what vegetable oil we're talking about? So,
Okay, he said if the increase in prices has led to a significant reduction in volumes of trade. I'm not sure that I can answer this question now, because out of now, I don't think the quantities traded are available. So we try to look at the trend observed in prices and to see what will be the different effects in terms of exports. But I mean, I'm not sure I have this the answer right now.
but still an excellent question, and perhaps an opportunity for future analysis going forward. There's another question here, Dr. Saul, about.
Could I comment on that one, Nate?
Oh, please, Dr. Baghdad, yes.
It's what we analyze and what the question is. We look at specifically the impact of vegetable oils prices and their change and what it does. Now, the model can tell you it should increase or decrease, but what happened on the ground depends on a lot of other things that you wouldn't have captured in the model. For example, if the government decided to subsidize, for example, and swallow the rising prices, then consumption wouldn't have gone down, right? So if they had some preferential trading arrangement with somebody, that would not. But if everything remains equal and nothing changes, the rising prices, just like you've seen in one of the last slides of Lisa, consumption has dropped across the board in terms of food items in countries where this higher price is actually equivalent to a tax and therefore a reduction in income. So you would have expected some substitution to take place eventually, as Fatima said, but probably people have to adjust their demand level, maybe by consuming more and less of these vegetable oils, or keeping their consumption intact by reducing others. So these are aspects that one could look into, but it was not what we modeled, because we just looked at ipso facto change in prices, and that's what you would expect, and what will go down. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dr. Saul, and also thank you, Dr. Badian, for that additional clarification. So there's another question in the chat asking, so looking specifically at Ghana, the question is, why specifically effects were observed in rural areas as compared to the urban sector in Ghana? So I guess that distribution of impact, rural versus urban. Dr. Fall? Excuse me, Dr. Saul?
Yes, I mean, for to respond to this question, it's mainly what I was trying to explain right now. It will depend on the dependency of rural household and urban household on these specific products identified. And if in the global structures, rural household are the group that are likely to benefit from it. So we will observe a higher effect on a rural household. Yeah, that's all I can say here. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So we are, I don't see any further questions that have come in either through the chat, and I don't see any hands that have been raised. So I think that, well, then I suppose if there are no further questions, then I think that maybe a final question that I might have for you, Dr. Saul, is that, you know, as you've said, there has been sort of a overall prices have kind of begun to normalize and come back down from the historic peaks 2 to 3 months after the invasion. But I think if anybody looks at the last year in global vegetable oil prices, it kind of belies the notion of a normal. And I suppose I'd be curious what some of your thoughts are now as you have unpacked the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine crisis and observe some of the effects at country level. What are some of your key takeaways from a policy perspective as we think about or begin to anticipate what some of the next market swings might be in vegetable oil prices?
All right. Thank you for the question. And actually, the results we find highlight how vulnerable countries can be if we are importing, if we are depending on other countries to satisfy our domestic needs. And now, at the very beginning of the crisis, we observe a high increase, which becomes lower, and countries started to adjust, trying to find some solutions, relying on domestic production, finding also some other substitute to what were imported, for example, considering using palm oils instead of other vegetables oils that were imported. So basically, it's as a policy option, it will raise the necessity to find additional local food that we may consider to be less vulnerable, and also given the difference we can observe in urban and rural area, it's important to at least protect the most vulnerable groups and to have an eye on their needs and to support them as much as possible. Now it's up to our countries' governments to get ready and to try to minimize the different effects. Over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Saul, and a special thank you for, with no notice, picking up and presenting on this in such a coherent and comprehensive manner, and really excellent work by Academia 2063 in this important topic. I suppose at this point, I'm happy to turn it back over to Lai for the closing of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you for agreeing to moderate this session. And a special thank you to Lisa Matisal, Senior Associate Scientist at Academia 2063 for today's presentation. Thank you to all our audience members for sticking with us, even though we started late due to some technical challenges at the beginning of the session. Please join us same time next week. We will start on time, and we will be hosting session 7 of the Ukraine Crisis webinar series. And we are going to discuss the potential for expansion of regional food trade based on brief 4. Authored by Usman Bajan and Sunday Ojo, and the presentation will be by Sunday Ojo, Deputy Director, Operational Support at Academia 2063. Please visit the chat and click on the links to the Ukraine Crisis portal to get all the briefs. So far, we have published 18 briefs and counting. Kindly also visit our SlideShare to gain access to all the PowerPoint presentations from this webinar series. And we'll see you next week. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Ciao, ciao. Thank you, Nate.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.